Hello, hello. It's Advent Nebula.
And Cruellica Kain.
And welcome to Pop Culture Therapy. And as we were talking about at the end of the last episode, Netflix and anime powerhouse? Well, when you think about it, it kind of has become one, whether it's been through stuff they produced by giving studios money, or what they've been doing is licensing stuff that has an established fan base already here in the U.S., like with Saki K, JoJo's with the Rohan OVAs, and what
Sword Art.
Well, Sword Art they don't.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Aniplex has that. But as I was saying, just recently, which as of this, it's been probably about 8 or 9 days since it premiered on Netflix, the Sailor Moon Eternal movies.
So this is what's so amazing about Netflix. Netflix, as many people know, depending on your age demographic, Netflix started as one of those rent-a-disc services where you could rent up to 3 movies or 3 discs a month.
And they were doing this to compete with Blockbuster at the time, back in the mid-90s when they first started out.
Mm-hmm. And then they changed, I would say, the late 2000s to early 2010 to actually doing more of a digital presence. They still had their disc presence, but they went digital with their platform as well. And then about 6 years ago, they went full digital.
You can still on occasion, through their site, rent stuff, but it is going to be completely phased out by the end of this year, because DVD and Blu-ray are pretty much out on their way.
Yes, I don't agree with it completely. Digital is definitely becoming the place to go. And over the years, especially more recently, Netflix has taken it upon themselves, since there's so much more competition with the streaming wars, to actually start producing original content. And most of the original content was more so on the live action spectrum, or some of the cartoon spectrum, like what they do with Voltron.
The upcoming Avatar series.
And so it's been pretty impressive to watch them grow. And then over the last few years, we've also gotten anime. And as Ava had said, originally it started where they would license things that they could stream. And the reason I mentioned Sword Art is because one of their most popular shows to stream on their service, even if they don't own it, has always been Sword Art Online.
Which Aniplex and Funimation now being under the same umbrella, you're starting to see a lot of those properties move away from Netflix.
Correct. And so Netflix, obviously not being able to have as much of Viz's properties or Funimation's, they are starting to have to come to a path forward of what they want to do. And some of the shows that they have notably produced have been like Devilman Crybaby, Ghost in the Shell 2045. Also, we've had the Ultraman series, as well as you've had
Violet Evergarden, probably their biggest one that they've done, and they also, the Seven Deadly Sins,
correct,
Kakakaguri. Now, to say that these shows are fully licensed by Netflix, it's just their streaming side. Other companies are picking up the home video rights, but there's a caveat with some of these. With the one Sentai Filmworks, if they did not do the dub for Netflix, has had to use their own in-house talent because they can't afford the LA cast, because Netflix is charging an exorbitant fee for actually using that dub on home video.
And that is one of the challenges, because Netflix admittedly does understand the logistics of having a dub version, because most people, especially locally within North America, and I'm including Canada in this because they get a lot of the similar things that we do, they they prefer to actually have it English speaking. Yes, Netflix has a lot of foreign television, and that's one of the reasons why I still keep it, because of the live action drama.
They're even dubbing their live action dramas from across the world now, which is actually like, it's kind of cringy.
I don't watch those, but for anime purposes or anything animation, admittedly one of my biggest preferences is if it's available, I would like to see it or listen to it in English, because at least if I'm not staring at the screen 100% of the time, I can still know what's going on without having to wonder, what did I miss?
Yeah, and I know a lot of sub purists are going, well, I don't want to watch it dubbed. Guess what? In Latin America, most people in Latin America prefer their Spanish dub over listening to it in Japanese. Mm-hmm. As we were talking about in the prior episode, Tokusatsu all goes over there completely dubbed over in Spanish. So,
and some of those Spanish actors do a fantastic job.
Yeah. I mean, they have had a lot more of a work at it and have more of an experience at it than we have. We probably only, since era of Cowboy Bebop and beyond, have actually started getting competent dubbing.
Yes, and even then, it can still be a little shaky.
Yeah. Where in Latin America, some of these people have been doing this since the 70s.
Well, exactly, because admittedly, the home of most pop culture is the United States, because we have Hollywood blockbusters.
Yeah.
So, and other countries come to the United States or utilize the United States, and I'm looking at James Bond, or I'm even looking at some of the big Chinese films or big Korean films that have come out, like Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. That was a Chinese film, but it was produced on a blockbuster budget, which most people equate to America. So foreign countries have had a lot of work over the decades just translating our content. Pluto TV just did a whole advertising boost for it. But not to get too far down that rabbit hole, what has been fascinating is Netflix is not who I think of when I think of anime. I think of them as more of a streaming storehouse for a variety of different properties.
In the same way Amazon Prime was, which has kind of, after Vinland Saga, given up on anime, it seems like.
Well, that's because what they did was a complete slap in the face to that series. But nevertheless, Netflix has been very smart and savvy. Even if they haven't always hit it out of the park, they've not given up. They've really demonstrated that try again until you figure it out. Because one series that I don't know if enough people know about or are really surprised that it's doing so well is Agretzko.
Yeah.
That is such a simple, kiddified show. It's not kiddish by any means, because Agretzko is one of my spirit animals, but or Gretzko, she goes by. But still, that show took off. Seven Deadly Sins.
Which, for its flaws in animation and cheap out tactics on its third season, still has a massive fan base.
Well, same thing with Beastars.
Yeah.
I don't find any interest in it myself because it's not my type of genre.
But that's high quality CGI animation that I have not seen produced in a while out of Japan, and it actually works for the show.
Well, and even though it's Aniplex, it still says Netflix original Fate Zero and Fate Apocrypha. Yes, they're Aniplex series, but Netflix was the one who helped pay to get those series produced.
Yep, and they got the streaming rights to them in North America.
Same thing with Great Pretenders, High Rise Invasion, and even when you go to Saint Seiya.
The new Saint Seiya, and they ended up getting the license in the U.S. for the original Saint Seiya. And if you don't know the history of the original Saint Seiya, the dub was never finished because ADV went under. Well, Netflix got most, and I'm saying most of ADV's cast back that did that to finish the last 69 episodes that were never dubbed. Now, there are a few cast changes because Ilish Guadalajara, which decided to marry his 14-year-old cousin, had to get recast.
Well, and it's fascinating because let's look at the most recent release, Sailor Moon.
Viz still has the home video rights for the Eternal movies.
Well, that's because they begged and fought and scrambled after the huge F-up they made.
Yeah.
And that's a day for another story. But nevertheless, Viz lost the license. And a lot of people, justifiably so, were worried in the States because we have the remainder of Crystal.
Yep.
Thankfully, I know this sounds very selfish, they lost the license after Sailor Stars was released because that makes me feel better. But after a huge mistake that they made, and it's public knowledge, so you can easily look it up online, they lost the license. And Netflix, being as smart as they did, said, hey, there's a huge fan base for this. We already have the talent because they're all LA.
Yep. And all of Netflix, outside of what they'll use for Sentai Filmsworks Studios in Houston for less profile series, they use basically the LA cast that everybody else does out there.
Well, and the one benefit also is that now with COVID demonstrating that people can have studios at home, I imagine that's going to grow significantly because they can partner with studios and be able to obtain talent that is not local to LA. But it's impressive with what Netflix has done because they currently have, for their Netflix original series, at least 50 different titles.
And they have, with the release of Yasuke, which is their most recent original that they ended up funding and producing, they have still 6 more, and they say they have a few more they're going to announce later this year coming down the pipeline.
And it's going to continue growing because, one, we do need a little bit more of that bigger level competition.
Yep.
Because truthfully, the two big parties for anime are Viz and Funimation. Yes, we have so many others, and I am not diminishing what Disco, Sentai, and everybody else does.
You gotta look at who has the money.
And that's exactly it. You follow the money, and you have two big competitors.
And it's going to change the dynamics too, because everybody knows this is common knowledge, animators in Japan get treated like shit and make very little money. Well, they actually say they prefer working on these Netflix originals because Netflix has some demands of the studios that have improved working conditions somewhat.
Well, and that I will say is at the where I respect the CEO of Netflix. The CEO of Netflix has been a huge advocate for proper work rights for all of their talents, going from the actors and actresses who perform all the way down to the staff. Yeah, there's going to be people who have complaints and things like that, but overall, Netflix has been very savvy, as I said before, about how they do everything, and that includes their staff. The barrier to entry to having a Netflix account is by no means cheap. It's at least $14.99 right now, and that still includes HD for 2 devices to play simultaneously.
Yeah, and it's probably going to get more expensive because of the new Witcher season. It's going to be the most expensive show Netflix has produced for its 8 episodes when that drops later this year.
And while you might not like the fact of the cost, and I think we talked about this in the past episode when we were talking about the entitlement of fan subs, but with regards to this, you have to weigh your options because you can download everything in the world if you absolutely wanted to, because where there's a will, there's a way. But the more companies that have secure servers, and Netflix is a great example of that.
Very few of their shows that are exclusive to their platform wind up on the 7 seas of the internet.
No, they have a very strong security protocol with their platform.
And every time one gets leaked on there, it's not online for very long.
Nope, it is pulled as quickly as they find it. And this is not bots doing it. Netflix is actually one of those few companies that, yes, they're going to have bots. Every big corporation does, because that's how they can easily sniff things out.
They have an actual team dedicated to just finding their series that they own leaked around the internet.
Yes, they're very determined, and that's not to say that it won't happen, but it definitely keeps the population there. And they also understand, and I think this is the reason for the increase in price, that families share their Netflix account. I share my Netflix account with 4 different people.
Hi.
I was going to say, Advent is one of them. And so there are, and I don't mean 4 different people, I mean 4 different households. So there's 4 other households, aside from my own with Kaiju, that has my Netflix account. So admittedly, while it is $15 a month, split between 5 households, that's actually pretty dang cheap.
Yeah, the amount of content Netflix, like, there was time you were going back and forth on keeping it, but then they have just upped their game the last year and a half.
They really have. And the reason why I even thought of it is because of the streaming wars. You now have HBO Max, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus. You have Pluto TV, thankfully that's free.
Tubi's thankfully free. Crackle's thankfully free. But then Amazon, which is the other big one that
Amazon Prime.
Amazon is the other one, like Netflix, producing its own original content.
And that's not including CW, which I think is moving fully to Paramount, but they have their own separate streaming. And there's tons of others. I can only imagine how many there are of others that I don't know about.
CW's not moving to Paramount, it's moving to more HBO.
HBO, yes. Thank you. Not CW, I mean CBS.
Yeah, CBS is moving to Paramount.
So, you have a ton of streaming services. And you still have cable television. Most people don't do cable television anymore because of the extreme cost. However, if you actually pay for every single streaming service...
It's basically the cable wars back in the day, back in the 90s and 2000s.
Yep, it's cable versus the satellite. So you have to weigh your options now of who you're truly going to support. And some savvy families, like my own family has done, is one person owns different platforms. I own 3 platforms just because it is convenient.
I have 2.
And my parents have 2. So between all of us, we have a number of different platforms that we can access to watch this. And I think, truthfully, if you wanted to save money, that's the smart way to go. But going back to Netflix, they truthfully did up their game. And being an anime fan and having so much competition now of not knowing where to go because there's so many series being licensed, you now have Netflix saying, we want to join the game, and we're not just going to showcase our originals, we're also going to work with other companies, Sentai, Disco, Funimation, and Viz, to air their properties. They don't air the entire line of properties because that would be foolish.
They go and select a series that they know is going to be based on what they have, and Netflix keeps a secret what trends and what works for their platform. But they use that algorithm to decide what they're going to pick up.
And their content keeps on growing. The fact that they are really in America, I can't speak for other countries, but at least for North America, they are the go-to platform for J-drama, K-drama, Spanish dramas, And so many...
They have brought over a ton of stuff from Korea that I am floored on how much they're bringing over from Korea.
And a lot of it, they're helping to produce. So if they're helping to produce in that foreign country for their version of Netflix as well, they're taking advantage and bringing it to the States, because if they're spending the money, why not take advantage of it?
Basically, all 18 countries Netflix has a headquarters in that produce original programming. They release it worldwide.
And the fact that Netflix is creating such a strong partnership with Japanese content creators to produce their original anime. For example, Aniplex, which Aniplex
is Sony's bread and butter.
It is Sony's bread and butter, and yes, it is owned by Sony, and Aniplex of America is owned simultaneously with Funimation, but Aniplex in Japan is still their own separate organization. And if they can't produce their content because they have no interest, and as much as I am happy that Sony owns them because they have a huge umbrella that does offer them a lot of protection, Sony doesn't just give them money and say, create what you want.
Aniplex ends up going, and it's a lot of these animation studios too. For a project to get off, it's got to be funded by somebody. And Netflix is the one forking the money over.
Because Funimation does not fund the money generally for a series.
They are funding unless it's with Toei. For some reason, Funimation loves spending money with Toei.
Yes, but Toei has definitely been their bread and butter. One Piece and Dragon Ball has clearly demonstrated that. But Funimation, Viz is a little bit different because they have a bit of a different... They're not a Netflix in regards to funding, but they have different relationships.
Basically, everything that Viz brings over is something that Warner Brothers owns a studio of animation over in Japan with.
For the most part, yes.
Warner Brothers, a lot of people don't know this. David Productions, even though Fire Force surprisingly got licensed by Funimation, David Productions is owned by Warner Brothers.
But because it's Warner Brothers of Japan, they still have to go where the money goes. But that's where it gets a little funky. Because technically, Death Note is owned by Warner Brothers. If you didn't know that, watch the live action movies. Big Warner Brother.
Yeah. It's just you are surprised to learn some of the stuff on who owns what with some of these worldwide companies.
And like you said, somebody has to fund it. And if Netflix is the only game in town who has the ability to actually fund and produce these shows, they don't have to worry about distribution rights when it goes on to disc. That's for the company and Netflix to decide, are we going to release it on disc?
Yeah, and as I was talking earlier, when it hits disc, sometimes they have a dub change for whatever region's releasing it. And it's just something you gotta live with. Because these licensors, when they're licensing from what Netflix produced, are gonna pick and choose what they're gonna feature and what they're willing to pay.
I was gonna say what they're willing to pay, because Netflix not only paid to help animate, and even though they're not directly involved in it, they're paying the money for people to do their jobs. Then they're also paying the money for the dubbing in both English, Japanese, and whatever multitude of languages. Because
usually Portuguese and 3 different types of Spanish.
And so you have all of that dubbing going on. A company has to, a distributor. Now, Aniplex is a little bit different with that because
they are their own distributor. They
are, but like you said with Sentai and Discotek, they're more grassroots and smaller. So if you don't see an English dub track and you only see the Japanese dub track, you have to think, could they not afford it? And it's a logistical understanding because you can't guarantee how much you're going to make on physical disc.
Yeah, and Discotek is one of those companies that they try to get everything they can They'll even try to get the original UK dubs. But I think that's why Discotech's avoiding anything Netflix. Because it's just too expensive for them.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit blue blood, I think. But why is Netflix an anime studio? That's really outside of are they? It's why are they?
Yeah. And when they're doing this, because they're own studio, and people are like, they don't like it because it's not traditional animation. Well, what they're picking for their CGI animation studio makes sense for a lot of the works when you look at the actual source material.
Oh, absolutely. While I'm not in agreement, well, I don't agree with how Ghost in the Shell 2045 was animated, I will admit it grew on me after I continued with the story. Same thing with the Ultraman anime. And you also have to think about it like this. Ghost in the Shell standalone complex is admittedly one of the most beloved anime sci-fi series since the 80s.
Early 90s when the manga came out.
Oh yeah, early 90s, sorry. I'm thinking of so many other sci-fis. But
Appleseed, his other work started in the 80s.
Thank you, yes, that's what I was thinking of. But still, Ghost in the Shell has been around for decades, and having a continuation of the standalone complex with the cast that was part of the original series is fantastic. And having an Ultraman series, I don't think anybody really thought, because this came before Mill Creek started really doing everything they did.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody ever thought we were going to truly get something Ultraman related in the US.
And Tsuburaya ended up letting Netflix use their own animation studio, and it kept the feel of the original manga and of the feel of what the old Showa era shows were like at the same time.
But I will say why Netflix is doing it is not because solely the money. I think they're doing it because they need another revenue stream to attract new content.
And what better way than to have your own studio?
Now, obviously, the bonus is going to be they're going to make more money.
Yeah.
But if they don't diversify, they're not going to continue keeping the same audience that they've had for decades. Because that's the one challenge, I would say, for any of these streaming services, is you have to look at it in two perspectives. You have to see how can you keep who has been loyal for years, and then how do you attract new customers. So if anime has been a huge platform on Netflix, which it has been for decades, why not take advantage of it? And I say decades because they've been around since the 90s, so.
Yeah, they've been around for almost 30 years.
Yes. So, why is kind of interesting.
Now, is it going to be successful? We don't know, because Netflix doesn't release their internal profit numbers because they aren't a publicly traded company.
Yeah, they are.
They are now?
Oh, yeah, they are. They've been for a few years. However, they don't have to list, they can list their profits. They don't have to list their algorithm to show their popularity trends for different products.
Which is so different because Bezos loves to show off what Prime does.
Yeah, but that's why he's not a part of Amazon anymore, and he thinks it's going to fail due to that. But do I like the fact that that Netflix doesn't showcase what the popularity trends are of their products? No, I'd like to see a little bit more of it, but at the same time, do I care? No. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to like what I like and going to watch what I want.
Yeah. The only thing is, it'd be nice for people who clamor for a niche series that gets canceled. It's like, okay, here, now you can see why.
Well, exactly. No, and that would be, I would say, the primary justification, because that's the one thing that people get when things are airing on public television.
Nielsen.
You get the Nielsen ratings, which the challenge with the streaming services now, and I'm no expert in Nielsen, but I'll be curious to see how this is going to adapt because it adapted to DVR. But streaming is such a different animal.
Nielsen's not really dealing with streaming. They're going more to social media and ad targeting now, which is kind of frustrating.
Well, it makes sense because they got to get an idea of what people are watching based on how they're representing it via social media.
And with that, I don't think there's really much more we can touch on this one.
No, I don't think there's much more. All I can say is I'm looking forward to seeing what else Netflix comes up with because they've been impressing me with just the diversity in animation.
Now, for our next one, we're going to go in and talk about an author who recently passed away, but his influence not only in Japan, but worldwide for fantasy that is not George R.R. Martin obviously can be seen since Berserk debuted in the 80s. And Minoru's passing, you just saw an outpour of love and support when he died from heart failure a few weeks back.
Yeah, and he was quite young. So who we're referencing is Kentaro Miura. And our next podcast will be a tribute to who he is and what kind of influence he has done, I think, on, like you said, the fantasy community, as well as just for us alone as fans.
Video games, if you are a Dark Souls, Bloodborne fan, or a fan of a lot of video games that have come out to have a dark fantasy setting, his influence can be seen throughout those.
Oh, absolutely. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a little bit more of what he has influenced, as well as just kind of where the future of Berserk is going to go as well.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into what is possible in our next episode.
So we will check you out and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Bye!